do you worry about the cost of your course materials? And students overwhelmingly said, yes, they do. Actually, 4 in 5 students responded that they do worry about the cost of their course materials.
Welcome to Being the Change, the official podcast of James Madison University, brought to you by Madison Magazine. Each episode brings to you stories of how members of the JMU community combine intellect with action to live lives of purpose and meaning. That's Being the Change.
What's up, JMU? Andy Perrine here. Welcome to Being the Change. Today we've got an interesting challenge to discuss that the university is meeting head on, and it's about something called Open Education Resources, or OER. And with us to discuss it are 2 members of the JMU community who are being the change. Malika Carter-Hoyt, she's Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at JMU. Malika, welcome.
Hello, and thank you.
Thanks for being here. And Liz Thompson, who is our Open Education Librarian at the JMU Libraries. Liz, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Well, before we get into the problem that Open Education Resources is trying to solve, please just give us a definition of what OER is, Liz.
Absolutely. Open educational resources are basically any teaching and learning materials that are licensed for free use. So under some of those licenses, OER can be edited and tailored to course goals, which really make them very flexible in addition to being very affordable. So they have a license that gives pre-approval for use without having to ask the copyright holder's permission. And a lot of OER are written by faculty at higher ed institutions.
Well, how does that arrangement get around the copyright issue?
Yeah, so it's a license on top of the copyright.
Okay.
So the authors retain the copyright, but then they add a license, typically a Creative Commons license. Those licenses are written in natural language, even though they're very legal. They're bedrock on the legal foundation. And they spell out specifically what users can do with the materials without having to ask permission. So
give us a specific example.
For a specific example, if you find a Creative Commons license on something, it can even be an image online, and it says CC BY NC, for example. What that means is it's a Creative Commons attribution non-commercial license, and anybody that uses that image can reuse it, redistribute it, save it, revise it, or remix it with something else for free without having to ask the author's permission. But they cannot sell it for commercial purposes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, so that's just one example. Basically, with the Creative Commons licenses, it's instead of under copyright, it would be all rights reserved to the author. It's some rights reserved to the author with the license on top.
Well, for our listeners who may not know, could you explain what the Creative Commons is?
Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that developed these commercial licenses probably about 10 or 15 years ago. And it really made an impact in the open ed community. It made it possible for these educational resources to be shared in a way that really, instead of having to go out and ask permission from all of these authors to reuse their materials, it just automatically opened the floodgates for people to be able to reuse and redistribute educational resources and share education in a way that really builds on that principle of common goods and public goods.
And also, it seems to me that the movement was also in response to the relatively high cost of educational materials that our students have to purchase. Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. And those costs aren't going down. They continue to rise every year, yeah.
Well, and Liz, for our listeners, is a bit of an expert in this area, and you could probably tell that she's a librarian in her very succinct description of what OER actually are. But Liz chaired an effort by the Virtual Library of Virginia, or VIVA, which is a group of all the colleges and universities in the Commonwealth. It's a consortium of nonprofit libraries in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And they did what was called a Virginia Course Materials Survey. And it found a lot of very interesting issues that students are facing with being able to afford things like textbooks. But then this was in 2019. And then in 2024, Liz took that survey instrument and actually conducted a survey here at JMU to see if the situation was the same on our campus. What did it find?
Yeah, so in last spring, actually the spring of 2024, we did a very similar survey to the Viva survey at JMU, and we got more than 700 student responses, which is a far cry from the 5,600 that they got for the Viva survey. But that was a statewide survey.
And this is a smaller community, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
But we found very similar responses.
And what were they?
Yeah. So they asked things like, do you worry about the cost of your course materials? And students overwhelmingly said, yes, they do. Actually, 4 in 5 students responded that they do worry about the cost of their course materials, either slightly or moderatively or extremely. And that was at JMU. Also, they say that they find ways to reduce the cost of their course materials. So they do things like they rent, they buy used copies, they share materials with their classmates because they can't afford them. And then a lot of students, maybe not surprisingly to some, but I was surprised by the number, choose not to buy their course materials. They literally make that choice. And that was 3 in 4 students actually have chosen not to buy their course materials.
Well, and that's got to negatively affect their performance in the course.
It does. It does. They say that they earn poor grades. They fail courses. They sometimes will take fewer courses because they know that they can't afford the materials. And they'll drop and withdraw because they simply can't afford that.
Well, and if I'm reading the data correctly, too, there's even the influence of making them change their minds about a major based on the cost of the materials. Is that right?
Students did say that they have chosen their institution and their majors because of the cost of course materials.
Wow, so that's got to affect retention, that's got to affect graduation rates. I mean, this is a real issue.
And it'll take them longer to graduate because they take fewer courses or they might have to drop a course. So yes, it really does impact their academic progress.
Well, and if these are students who are struggling financially, if they're here longer, it's going to be even harder for them to pay off their debts.
Exactly.
Wow, okay. Well, one of the things also that I saw in the survey results is that the findings revealed some very challenging demographic realities, and that students experiencing one or more areas of quote-unquote financial or social concern were far more likely to report that they were quote-unquote extremely worried about course materials cost. So that's affecting a demographic at JMU and elsewhere based on the Viva study that is really challenging some communities. Malika, your experience in helping folks discover pathways that are challenging for folks, what is your experience with OER helping kids?
Yeah, I will let you know that it is important for me because this is part and parcel of my own experience. And I can distinctly remember going to the class the semester before it ended and going equipped with the information from the bookstore. I would not otherwise announce this, but the moment has passed, so I'm okay. Statute of limitations and everything. And
nobody's listening.
Yeah. And so what I would do is I would make sure that I understood what the book was going to be sold for, used and new, go to the class and just sit there until it ended, at the tail end of the semester, say, hey, this is how much the bookstore is going to give you for your book. I'll undercut that, and then I'll throw in $5 if you give me your notes. And so students hustle. They have to figure out a way to make it because they realize that just like any other business, higher education is just that, a business. And they need to make sure that they get through. And the only way to get through is to be extremely creative. And so that is my experience. And I will tell you that open education resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion are deeply and inextricably connected. And as we aim to create more accessible, more equitable, and more inclusive educational environments, and they relate in a few different ways. Some off the top of my head are accessibility and equity, and that OER are freely accessible and openly licensed. And so, as was just described by Liz, is that they can be used, adapted, and redistributed. I wasn't able to do that legally, but here's what I did. Again, statute of limitations, right? Cone of silence is this? Nah. And so what I would do in my work study job as a student, I would go and wait until after my shift was over. And they would say, oh, your shift is over. I know, And I've told Liz this is why she's smiling. And that is, I would stay there and I would literally copy the book. Didn't I know it was illegal? Nobody told me that. I just knew that I had to read this book and I had assignments to do. And so it is important that we understand that if we don't custom fit the institution for people, they'll make a way for themselves, right? Invention, necessity, all that. All right. Also, it has some cultural relevance as well.
In what way?
In that OER allows educators to adapt materials to better reflect diverse cultural perspectives and voices and experiences. And often when people choose books in order to help students to understand a particular topic, they may not necessarily be making those choices to literally diversify the voice, right? So who are we choosing? Do we have to buy that X amount of dollar book that is only written by one author, or do we choose an anthology that is written by several authors? And can I mix and match that, whereby students are learning from different voices and different perspectives on a particular issue?
So OER is actually broadening the choices or what's available to faculty who are choosing course materials.
Yeah, and that customization ensures that the educational content is more inclusive and relevant to a broader range of students, thereby enticing them probably to most likely engage in that particular class or to be more available mentally because they can see more authors reflected instead of one that they cannot relate to.
You know, one of the things that JMU is becoming pretty well known for is being a place where first-generation students are able to find their way through what's called the hidden curriculum, which is everything else besides mathematics and science and English. It's just finding your way through an institution. And I'm wondering that OER has got to be, and JMU's focus on it has got to be really helpful for students who are really just having to find their own way.
Yeah, I can lean in on that just a little bit. And that is the collaboration and empowerment that we can do across professionals at the institution in order to support students is greater with OER as well. In that the open nature encourages collaboration among educators and students themselves and various different communities. It also can open up many ways of doing interdisciplinary work. So it has lots of possibilities.
It definitely does. I will say that sometimes it does come as a surprise to first-gen students that they have to spend more money on books, that it's not already included in the cost of attending the institution. So I think that open educational resources are especially helpful for them.
Give me a sense of the volume of the amount of students at JMU who avail themselves of OER.
Ooh, number of students. That's a good question.
Or the portion of materials that are being used.
Yeah, so I'll just share with you. I partnered with the registrar's office a few years ago, and we adjusted the system, the student system that they use to enroll every semester in their upcoming courses, so that they can now see which sections actually have course materials that are either low cost or no cost. The low cost is less than $40 at the JMU bookstore. So anything that falls into that category would be identified that way in the system. So students can actually see that when they go in to register for classes. But about, I'm going to say about 10% of sections that are listed for an entire semester carry one of those identifiers, either no cost or low cost,
Got it.
to give you kind of a sense of where we are on campus with how OER is being used by students.
Well, give me some examples of particular situations that you've seen students successfully make a decision about a course to take, or based on the fact that they knew that OER was available to them.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
There were some, we had an opportunity to canvas students, and we were in the hallway of one of our major buildings here, and we knew that there was lots of traffic, and we had a happy face, a medium, like stone face, and then a sad face, and we asked students to give us their, which one when it came to their books. And then that garnered a lot of stories about students and what OER had done for them. They said, oh yeah, my professor has done this, and I'm so glad because I was in this other class, I bought the book, it cost X amount of dollars, and we never used it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And it made me so sad for them, because what are you going to do with it? Well, some of us, if, depending on who we are, we keep our books, right? Not me. But I made sure that I sold them all back because I needed every penny. But some people really do keep them. But if you don't feel connected to that content, yet you have bought it, what's the use? You're probably never really going to even crack that book open. And so many students told us that they had had an experience by which they were grateful that their professor had taken what they saw as an extra step
Right.
in order to prepare materials for them. And then students also told us that depending upon what major, they had created libraries themselves. So that as a cohort, if you will, of students, or as a particular major, they could share materials without even purchasing them.
How well aware are faculty of this resource? Malika, when you're describing the students who appreciate faculty going that extra step to make sure that there were free or at least less expensive materials available to the course, that would seem to me to create a lot of empathy between the faculty and the student.
Yeah, we realize that faculty members definitely sometimes write their own books, right? And we wanted to make sure that we balanced what we were trying to espouse with the fact that they have their own creative writing and they deserve, right, in order to have that promulgated. But I can tell you that there's lots of things that Liz has done. Liz, you could talk maybe about what we have done through offering grants for faculty members to be involved in OER, and there are several partnerships for promulgating information to individuals about the fact that they could do this, because I think some don't even see it as an option until we bring it up.
I think that's what we learned last year, isn't it, when we participated in the AAC&U Institute. Do I need to say what AAC&U stands for?
The American Association of Colleges and Universities.
Thank you so much. So last year, Malika and I participated in a small team from JMU that was able to really dig in and talk to people across the institution and find out really what their awareness of open educational resources was. Some things that the libraries are doing to promote it would be workshops with faculty. We do promote with the students to let them know they can find out which of their classes have potentially the no-cost and low-cost materials. And then in the summer, we discovered that faculty do a lot of revisions to their courses. So the libraries has developed a stipend program to assist with instructors that are interested in transitioning a course away from a commercial textbook to an open educational resource. And that's been really popular. I think they've really appreciated that level of support.
Well, and I've been reading that it's not just a JMU problem, but there is this problem at JMU, but that as demographics change, students are showing up here on campus who have food insecurity or are really challenged to make rent. And to hear the stories of having to purchase an expensive book and then never use it is heartbreaking when you think about a student who is having trouble getting enough groceries.
Yeah, many times when we talk about DEI, many people leave out the accessibility and the belonging part.
Right.
And if there's one thing that I know, when you join an institution, belonging costs. I don't care who you belong to. It costs. You got to contribute to the community in some way, right? And so not only food insecurity and things like that, but also affiliations. Think about how many affiliations there are in college that people literally have to pay into them, right? And that can sometimes be a challenge if you have not only the food insecurity, the belonging, the cost of belonging, right? And then maybe something on top of that that may also be impacting your family and that you're in part responsible for supporting them depending on what demographic you're coming from and the phenomena that may exist for people in your demographic. It can be a lot for many students. And depending upon the combination of all those identity factors, it can be really for them like a tsunami, an overwhelming, a daunting task to only just come to school.
Right.
And so it's extremely important that we recognize that there's all these intersecting identities that are occurring. And we may think that it's just one thing. It may just be food insecurity for one, but for another, it could be, wow, I'm helping mom and dad hold down the mortgage.
Right.
Or I'm, doing these other things that may be pulling at, my psyche, and then therefore eroding the quality that I may even be contributing to or being able to benefit from in the classroom.
Well, how can our listeners either learn more or help to support this movement at JMU?
Well, a couple of things that I had in mind were that we like to celebrate our OER users and supporters. So there's all sorts of opportunities to help celebrate the folks at JMU that are doing this work. And just be a partner if there's an opportunity. And there are resources available on the library's website in particular that are, I think, very helpful. I think that's what came to mind for me, but I think Malika also had a list.
Oh, I have a list. Yes, I do.
And this celebrating OER is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So here's a couple different things that I made note of to myself. I made note of advocate for OER adoption and also balance that with honoring the faculty members who have creative thought written down or have creative thought created, not necessarily written down, or it could be a sculpture even, what that may be. I also thought about participating in OER creation and curation, and that can be extremely difficult for some, depending upon what your content is. Because if I'm a chemist, I may have to work a little bit harder than someone, right, that's in a different area.
Sure.
And then providing professional development. I think making sure that people, if you happen to be a supervisor, that direct reports are aware of and also able to help co-create some of these things that may benefit students. And dare I say it, if it's just sitting on a shelf, hey, maybe somebody else just may be inspired. That's not my major at all, but I may pick it up and read it, right? Have some access to it, which deepens our commitment to an interdisciplinary environment. And then the last two I would say is promoting OER awareness. Many of us have social media. Let students know that this is something that we care about. Let faculty know how they can get involved. That will be simple to do. And the last is incorporating OER into policies and procedure. Sometimes we may not necessarily think about guiding behavior of individuals that are a part of our institution, but policy and procedure does that pretty well. And so if we set up an expectation in those things, so for instance, if we have a procedure every single time we have new students come in, we invite them to this. Are we, do we have it built in? Are we introducing this during orientation time or when they come and visit the college?
Or even new faculty orientation as well. Right,
in so many different ways. We can simply just slip it in. And yeah, of course, many orientations are jam-packed, full of things already. But any time that we can get in information about this, I think it would be helpful.
Well, I'm hopeful that this episode of Being the Change will bring some more attention to the importance of open educational resources at JMU. And Malika and Liz, I thank you so much for visiting with us today on the podcast.
Indeed, thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, listeners, if you have any ideas for other episodes of Being the Change, you can reach us at beingthechange@jmu.edu. Until next time, go Dukes.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time to hear another story of how members of the James Madison University community are being the change. Dive deeper and consume countless other stories at jmu.edu/Madison Magazine. Go Dukes!
The Being the Change podcast was conceived by Jim Heffernan, editor of Madison Magazine, and me, Andy Perrine, head of JMU Marketing. Thanks to Jenna Polk and the team at Rose Library Studios, where the show is recorded by Steve Adderton, the guy who also captures those amazing campus drone shots you see on Instagram. Original music by Neil Perrine, and episode production by the Downtown Creative. All of us involved in creating Being the Change are JMU alumni, and we bleed purple. You can find the Being the Change podcast on all popular platforms, where we hope you'll like, share, and subscribe.